Hi, my name is Jay Reid. I'm a psychotherapist in San Francisco, California. And today I'd like to talk about practicing a loving attitude towards yourself after narcissistic abuse. What I found time and again in working with folks who've endured and are in the process of trying to recover from the effects of narcissistic abuse is that there's this sort of different sort of schools of therapy call it different things. In internal family systems, they would call it the adult sort of wise self. Carl Rogers might call it the organismic self, but whatever the term for it is, there's some part of the survivor's kind of constitution that remains in the hunt for an experience in life or a way of living that feels congruent with what they know deep down they deserve. A sort of willingness not to put up with the status quo of dis-ease that's often created through what adaptations need to be made in order to survive narcissistic abuse. And it's that kind of relentlessness to find a better quality of life that I think can really, again, over time and with patience, be harnessed to towards the goal that I want to discuss in today's video. And sort of more specifically, in surviving narcissistic abuse, I think one typically needs to become exquisite at caring for others, and often this tends to be the narcissistic parent or partner. What I've encountered is it's both a matter of survival to figure out how to put the other person first and in essence care more for them than oneself, because often that sacrifice is what's required by the narcissistic person to feel like they are being treated in the kind of artificially inflated way they think they deserve. At the same time, though, what often I think happens is that the survivor, though they had to kind of purpose their kind of caring capacity towards self-preservation in this way by caring for the narcissistic parent or partner, the survivor also typically has the genuine high capacity to care for other people, that it's also a genuine feature of who he or she is in the world. And I think in recovery, there's an opportunity to gradually bring some of that sort of instinct to care, I might even call it instinct to love, into and towards oneself. The instinct can be, at least, say something like, I don't matter. What matters is this other person, this parent or this partner. And therefore, I'm going to heap all the care I possibly can onto them. That's the sort of right thing to do. And as those rules for living get kind of challenged, then I think that it can grow to feel much safer, and that there's more kind of room and flexibility to, in essence, direct some of that towards oneself. That if I'm the survivor, I deserve my own love too. And again, this is something that needs to, I think, generally speaking, get practiced. It's not sort of something that gets stated and things sort of feel that way right away. So how does one learn to cultivate this sort of loving attitude towards oneself? Well, before I get into that, I do just want to bring your attention again to the online course on recovery from narcissistic abuse, because it's exactly the kind of topic that's being discussed today that course is able to go into a lot greater depth. So again, this is the webpage for the course, well, for the introduction to the course. And then if you click on any of these buttons, you get to the part of the course where you can actually purchase it here. But just to kind of give you an overview, the course basically goes into kind of what happened back then and making sense of it, the importance of gaining distance and safety from the narcissistic abuser, and lastly, living in defiance of the narcissistic abuser's rules for living. And today's video is very aligned with the content in Module 5, which is freeing yourself from beliefs that keep you at home. Or by at home, it means kind of without the distance needed from the narcissistic abuser. So if you find that today's video is useful and you'd like to get a little more in depth, I would recommend coming to this page and kind of getting a sense of what the course is about to see if it might be the right fit for you. And here's the website address. You can also find it in the description below. Okay, so how does one cultivate and practice a loving attitude towards oneself? Well, just take a step back, kind of like what maybe the challenge is to doing this for the survivor of narcissistic abuse. You know, when one's not met by a loving reception from a parent or partner, but instead is expected to provide a loving reception to that narcissistic, again, parent or partner, then some compromises need to be made for the survivor in his or her relationship to his or her self, in order to kind of meet the demands of the situation. And, you know, again, those demands are that the narcissistic person has to deserve all the care and all the attention, and the survivor needs to be willing to kind of sacrifice their right to such care, particularly from themselves. And I think that one important, I guess, way to develop a kind of relationship with oneself when in the throes of narcissistic abuse that that can keep the tie to the self going just enough so that once the abuse ends, there's an opportunity to kind of like regroup and come back to the self and forge an even stronger connection. But one of the ways that I've noticed that that is often used to maintain some semblance of connection to the self when everything needs to be directed outward, and there's very little coming towards the self from the narcissistic person due to, you know, that the limitations of that narcissistic person's psychology, is to kind of develop an analytical stance towards the self, almost treating the self as a puzzle to be solved. And it's, I think, very well intentioned because it offers hope that, you know, if one can arrive at the answer that will cure the feelings of, say, low-level despair, feeling devalued and inconsequential in the world, then that's worth its weight in gold when you're in the throes of narcissistic abuse, I believe. But what can become possible after getting through the narcissistic abuse, when there's no sort of relief, protection, or escape afforded, then it can become possible to notice the conspicuous absence of sort of a kind, loving stance and connection to oneself. You know, when one has to adopt this kind of analytical stance towards oneself, there's usually often the caveat that, like, once I solve, you know, the problem that is me, then I will deserve my own love, and certainly maybe then the love of others. And it's that sort of like waiting game that gets to be sort of challenged here, where an effort can be made to deliberately, again, patiently and gently and incrementally kind of cultivate the presence of a kind of caring and kind attitude towards oneself. You know, and I emphasize the sort of patience needed and the in some ways the gradualness of executing this kind of strategy of you know, developing a loving relationship with the self, for a very important reason, in my opinion. That is that, again, the trauma I think one faced in narcissistic abuse could, you know, be one or both of two things: utter rejection or slash maybe even a felt sense of destruction or annihilation by the narcissist, and or utter abandonment. And if someone was unfortunate enough to experience this from a young age, the post-traumatic echoes of having been threatened in that way, and the feeling that one is sort of on the cusp of falling into an abyss that I think in some ways is subjectively what it could feel like, again, I think deserves our respect for all the things that one has had to do to mitigate that danger. And one of the things I think that's very important when faced with a narcissistic parent, particularly to mitigate that danger, is to adopt the belief that one isn't deserving of care or even love from oneself. It sounds bad, right, to say that, oh, I don't deserve love, but I think looked at from this vantage point, it's actually a very in some ways, kind of a loving thing to do for oneself, because it's saying, no, you're going to get through this. We're going to think something about ourselves. We need to, in order to stave off this worse outcome, the annihilation or the abandonment. And I think some of the wisdom in this is that once that danger has passed, then we can begin to challenge this sort of solution of thinking we don't deserve love, because one can only do that when they know they're safe from that threat of annihilation or abandonment. So anyway, in the course of, I think, recovery from narcissistic abuse, one is trying to kind of let your system know that the danger has passed. And again, that's a gradual kind of iterative process that I just also want to emphasize, I think is important to respect that one's own timing for that, one's system's timing for that. So a few tactics for how to kind of curate and practice this sort of attitude towards oneself can be just asking yourself in a given moment, what's the most caring way I can be towards myself right now? And in some ways, it's kind of like, the thinking and the analysis may be kind of like going at full steam ahead. And this is sort of different in that it's kind of like something like, or this is the attitude to cultivate, sort of like, I like you. And that's sort of it. And, going along with that, one might also put a hand on your solar plexus and just simply, say to yourself, I got you. And it may not feel like one's touch may not even feel like this is may not even feel that reassuring right away, or soothing, or even protective. But the continued practice, unfortunately, I don't think you can see me doing this, but putting one's hand like this and just putting it on the solar plexus like that can be an important way throughout the day to just kind of like practice this way of connecting to oneself. It's, I think, really a loving way to connect to oneself. It's done before the answer to the puzzle is gotten to, and all the other kind of rubric that needed to be created before one felt deserving. And it's just simply saying, no, I have you, I'm with you. And in a way, the theme is sort of asking how you can express love towards yourself in every facet of your experience, even the part that might be feeling like, even the part that might be hating yourself in that moment. Not to say that feels good or that it's not painful, but to be able to kind of even say to that part, I got you. It can be over time very transformative, actually, to that part that's, I think, had to grow to be sort of hateful to the self in order to get through what had to be gotten through. And I want to emphasize too that, in this process, that patience is a virtue too. So is slowness. It's interesting. I think, like, in some ways, hatred can operate very quickly, very fast. Love seems to need a longer window to get in towards the self. I think if folks follow the stock market, when a stock price goes down, it tends to happen very fast. But for a stock's price to climb, it actually, sometimes there's a big jump if there's good news or something, but typically it goes in a much more gradual upward direction. And I think it's the underlying reason for that is applicable here, because when there's bad news for a stock, people get afraid, like, oh, I'm going to lose all my money. So everyone sells. And so it's rapid. It's like, okay, a few people are selling, now everyone's selling, I got to get out of here. And so the stock price sort of plummets. But the kind of cultivation of optimism for the stock kind of happens much more slowly over time and building, but is typically a much stronger path. Because what often happens with these plummets in stock price is it tends to go back up relatively, quickly. We saw the 2020 market crash, and here we are much higher. So that example, it just kind of came to mind. So I hope it's I hope it makes some sense. But in larger terms, I think things that are sort of that when we do things out of fear, they tend to happen fast and abruptly. And when we do things based around hope, there's a much more kind of gradual process that is very strong. I think that's applicable here when we're talking about building and cultivating a loving attitude towards oneself. It's a process that I think requires patience and gentle optimism as one does these tactics in an ongoing way. One example of kind of the shift from trying to kind of solve oneself to loving oneself is someone talked about having this thought of like, I was thinking, like, as I was doing some task, maybe I'm not doing this right, and maybe and then that kind of got some traction. And there's another voice that came in and said, you know what, it doesn't matter if you're doing it right or wrong, I love you. And I just thought that was such a succinct and somewhat beautiful way of capturing this shift in essence of the relationship one gets to have towards oneself. All the tactics I've described in these videos, in prior videos, from breathing to practicing qigong to this practice of putting sort of a hand on your solar plexus, they all, I think, are designed to kind of promote a loving attitude towards oneself. And my hope from today's video is that it kind of offered a little more explanatory framework for that, and kind of like offer a way to think about kind of like effortfully kind of being loving towards oneself, because that may, in a way that can interrupt some of the other cycles of kind of treating oneself harshly and critically, again, out of the practiced way of knowing how to survive. Well, thank you again for watching today's video. I so much appreciate everyone's engagement and comments on the channel and the videos. And I look forward to posting again next week, Sundays at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Take care. Well, happy Halloween and take care.